After the latest attempt to resurrect the Halloween franchise with Halloween 3D failed in 2012, it was clear that the series needed a retooling. But how exactly were they going to do that retooling? Who was going to be a part of it? What timeline would it follow? Where was Halloween at this point? It had become clear that enough time had passed that Rob Zombie's films were not going to be continued upon. And with a remake just having happened less than a decade earlier, there was no need to do another remake. So where do they go from there? In May of 2014, it was reported directly by HalloweenMovies.com that a new Halloween film was going into production at Dimension Films. Marcus Dunstan was tapped to write and direct the film, and Patrick Melton was tapped to be another writer on the film. Melton and Dunstan had done films such as Saw 4, Saw 6, Saw the Final Chapter, The Collector, Piranha 3 Double D, The Collection, and so on. They were kind of making a name for themselves as being these gritty, dark filmmakers and writers. So it was an interesting decision to tap these two to do the film. And it kind of made sense. Having worked with Dimension over the last couple years and giving them decent results, why not? Why not bring these guys on board? It was being called a recalibration of the Halloween franchise. And that term being thrown around made people immediately go, reboot? Which was confirmed by Malek himself that it wasn't going to be a reboot. So then what was the story going to be? How exactly are you going to recalibrate Halloween? How are you not going to continue from Rob Zombie's stories while also not remaking the film entirely? Since a remake had just come out recently, there was no point in doing that again. So what was the plot of Halloween Returns? So Halloween Returns took place 10 years after the events of John Carpenter's Halloween, with it starting off on the same night as the original. Michael Myers wandering the streets of Haddonfield, killing people. He winds up at Deputy Hunt's household. Yes, that Deputy Hunt, played by Hunter Von Leer, a fan favorite from the original Halloween 2. Well, Deputy Hunt's wife falls victim to Michael Myers' rampage. Hunt shows up with a psychiatrist known as Paul Rogers, and Michael submits and is taken into custody. Fast forward 10 years, Michael is on death row, Deputy Hunt is now Sheriff Hunt, and we are introduced to a character named Sophia, who is dating a man named Noah, who is actually Sheriff Hunt's son. Now, I should let you guys know, the intention from Melton and Dunstan, to my knowledge, was to bring Hunter Von Leer back to play Hunt, which would have been an interesting decision considering he would have been much older, and this is supposed to take place 10 years later. But I loved Hunter Von Leer in the role, and I could have totally suspended disbelief if it meant that he came back to the role. So 10 years later, like I said, Michael's on death row. Paul Rogers, the psychiatrist that was there that night, is the father of Sophia, and she is dating Noah, the sheriff's son. They both have a connection to what happened that night in 1978. Noah convinces Sophia that they should go into the execution room to watch as Michael is executed. But as he's being executed by lethal injection, he locks eyes with Sophia, and he starts to struggle and break free from his restraints. And he goes on a rampage throughout the prison. And then he's loose on the streets of Russellville. Yes, Russellville, which has been name dropped in the Halloween franchise a few times. A party is being planned by Noah and his friends, and everybody's going to join in on the fun, but Michael Myers crashes the party. We get a lot of friends mentioned throughout: Bear, Emma, Liam, a lot of characters, but they're not as relevant to the story as our main characters, Noah and Sophia. And that's really the plot of Halloween Returns. It was going to be a new group of teenagers, a new group of people that are chased and hunted down one by Michael Myers. It was 10 years after the original Halloween. There was no familial connection. The attempt was truly to make Michael the Shape again, to make him motiveless, and to make him simply just a force of nature. Now, I have to say, this is probably my favorite Halloween script for a Halloween film that never got made. There have been a lot of scripts over the years for this series that have not been very good. I just covered Halloween 3D the other day. While there were some cool aspects to it, that was not a strong script. This was a strong script. A few things about Halloween Returns that stood out to me is the tact that they took with approaching Michael Myers. Michael was genuinely the shape again. There are multiple points throughout the script, which you can read online, where they mention that Michael's face will never be shown. He lurks in the shadows a lot. He's a stalker again. He's this ever-present force and this ever-present threat, yet you rarely, if ever, see him. He's truly treated like a ghost. That is a huge deal because this was supposed to really be a sequel to the original Halloween, and in ways, Halloween 2 as well. So I feel like you would have to approach it that way with keeping Michael the way he was in that original film. There's some great kills in here too, and some great Michael moments. So there's a nice balance of the old school shape, while also giving you some of the gore and violence you would expect from a modern slasher movie. Melton and Dunstan do this really well. If you've seen a number of their movies, they do gore incredibly well. That's something that they've always been good at. And I think the added touch that they brought to this script, on top of keeping it very cerebral, would have created a lot of levity. Another thing about this script that really stood out was there's a lot of callbacks. John Carpenter's The Thing is on TV at one point, which was an interesting little tidbit. There's nods to Halloween 3, Halloween H2O, Halloween 5. Now some might hear that and go, well, that's unnecessary fan service. We don't need to be drowned by nostalgia. Yeah, I guess, but look what Blumhouse did. They gave us plenty of that. So I honestly would not have been upset if there was nostalgia, if there was kind of beating us over the head with those callbacks at times. It's kind of part of the territory. Now the timeline is a bit funky though. There's some continuity errors and definitely some moments where you can see that they're trying to modernize this, but you're supposed to be working within the framework of 1988. There's a mention about selfies, smartphones. Doesn't really make much sense, does it? I've heard people complain about Michael Myers being on death row for 10 years. That's actually pretty commonplace. Most people are on death row for a long time, which I personally don't understand, but that's not unrealistic at all. There's also an emphasis on Michael's eyes. And I am never going to be a big fan of that. I don't need to see into his eyes so much because it humanizes him too much. In the original Halloween, you don't have that. In the original Halloween, they're shrouded in darkness. It helps make him more of a shape, more of purely and simply evil. So while there are some negatives to this script, it is overall an incredibly solid script with great writing, good characters, not being weighed down by too much that came before it, great kills. It seemed like would have been really good practical effects to see, and a focus on Michael Myers truly being supernatural again. And that is only underlined by the ending of the movie. Michael Myers writes on a wall in blood, "This town will never be safe again." Now, some people upon hearing that took issue with that because they said, well, that makes it seem like Michael can communicate. I wouldn't have taken issue with that because, that's just a baseline of being able to write. The guy can drive. Is it really that much of a stretch? And it also helps lend to the fact that this is personal for the town, but not personal for any family member or survivor. Michael Myers wants to wreak havoc on Haddonfield, Illinois. If you're in his way, you're going to die. As long as he or it is alive, it will drive the shape to kill. And the ending of the script left things very open-ended. Michael disappeared. He didn't die. He's just gone. Similar to the first movie, this specter that's going to hang over Haddonfield is still there. It hasn't gone anywhere. That would have been really, really cool. And then there was a post-credit scene or a mid-credit scene. That was to include the psychiatrist, Paul Rogers, in a hospital bed, speaking to a man in a trench coat, talking about Michael Myers and calling him him. To which we find out this man in the trench coat is Dr. Loomis, played by Gary Oldman, as it says in the script, which I would have personally loved. And Loomis says that's not a him. He's purely and simply evil. And that was the end of the script. Now, whether you were going to continue with Loomis and make a sequel to this movie had it ended up happening, would fans have been lukewarm on recasting Loomis for modern day? Sure, but they were with Malcolm McDowell as well. And say what you will about Rob Zombie's movies, I haven't really ever heard anybody complain about Malcolm McDowell in the role of Dr. Loomis. He was incredibly solid in that movie. So Oldman would have been a great choice, and I think it was just enough of a tease at the end and a nice nod to the fans. Yes, Dr. Loomis is still around, he's still here, while also not having to tie us to Dr. Loomis throughout in this entire movie. It was able to stand on its own without Dr. Loomis. Sure, it had Deputy Hunt back, but that's really it. It wasn't weighed down by previous movies that came before it. So why didn't Halloween Returns happen? Well, you'll get a lot of conflicting opinions on that. Filming was supposed to take place in July of that year, 2014, and then it just didn't happen. From what I had heard over the years is that there was an issue with shooting in another country. I believe it was Bulgaria or Romania, something like that. Maybe it was Hungary. I cannot seem to find it online anywhere at this point, but I remember speaking to Sean Clark about this specifically. Malik Akkad made a point to say, we're not shooting in another country. That's not happening. Halloween is the Midwest. We are shooting in Midwest America. Some of it was slated to take place in Louisiana as well. Financials also played a role in it. See, at this point, Dimension Films was not exactly on good footing. So whether you want to chalk it up to locations, finances, I'm sure a mixture of the two played a role. But the biggest role was Dimension didn't get it started quick enough, and the rights lapsed, and they were gone. The rights to the Halloween franchise no longer were with Miramax, not at least theatrically. A new deal needed to be made. Now we know a couple years later a new deal was made with a new partner, Blumhouse, but at the time the franchise rights had no home. And because of that, any projects that were in development were no longer in development. Now, again, in my last video, I spoke about what happened next with Blumhouse. But talking about Halloween Returns specifically, this movie was a really, really solid idea. It was written well. I'm sure it would have been directed well. It was gritty. It was gory. It was suspenseful. And it brought the Shape back to truly being the Shape. Now, whether Dunstan and Melton could have pulled that off, who's to say? It's not their bread and butter. Their bread and butter is buckets of blood, boobs, but not in a schlocky way. See, as with Todd Farmer with Halloween 3D, he's very schlocky, very over the top and comedic. Melton and Dunstan just are depraved. In a good way. So whether they could have pulled off this kind of supernatural element of Michael Myers and really delivered that suspense and that slow burn, we'll never know. But Halloween Returns not happening was a travesty in my opinion, because it is an incredibly solid script and a movie that I would have loved to have seen made. Now I'm happy with what ended up happening with Halloween for the most part, and I'm just really happy that Halloween came back because my biggest fear was that it never would. But Halloween Returns was, I think, a golden idea that just never got to happen. Maybe they can revisit it now that the franchise's timeline is resting in peace and they need to start somewhere new. Who's to say? Do yourselves a favor. Go online and read the script for Halloween Returns, because it's truly a good idea and well executed. But at the end of the day, Halloween Returns never saw the light of day. But Michael Myers, he lives on.